Thank you everyone for joining this discussion. Earlier today, we announced a new set of capabilities as part of Windows or Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. So the focus of this discussion today is going to be around our new next generation and risk-based approach to vulnerability management. And I hope you like what we have today. We have a set of demos and a lot of exciting news of how this groundbreaking technology works under the hood. So I hope you all have fun. So, as you probably know, Microsoft Defender ATP has some great detection and response capabilities. We know how to detect a threat, we know how to detect a breach in the organization, and we know how to respond to it automatically. Now, what usually happens after a breach occurs in the organization is you bring an expert that will do a root cause analysis, trying to figure out exactly how the attacker got inside the organization. You will run a security assessment and figure it out, oh, the attacker got in through this attack vector. Now, actually doing this kind of security assessment, even before a breach happens inside the organization, is the best line of defense today. And unfortunately, when you're looking at the market today and at the technologies today, the solutions that help you figuring out what kind of vulnerabilities you have and what kind of attacks are you under at a certain moment are siloed. You have a product that is in charge of doing vulnerability assessment, and you have a product that is supposed to do threat detection. There are two different personas who are handling them. The SecOps, who is looking at incidents and alerts, and there's the SecAdmin, who are looking how to reduce the risk within the organization. And unfortunately, they're siloed. So wouldn't it be wonderful if the SecOps, while he's investigating investigation and alert and incident within the organization, will have access to the vulnerability assessment signals. This will help him automatically coming up to a root cause analysis. Oh, that machine was breached, and at the time of the breach, it also was vulnerable to this set of applications. And on the other side, when you're looking at the SecAdmin, the person who is in charge of working with different teams within the organization to reduce the risk in the organization and increase the security posture, would it be wonderful if he had access to the SecOps signals, to the alerts? That would help him understand which one he needs to prioritize first. Obviously, you want to tackle the ones that are targeting your organization right now. And that vision of bringing together security operations and vulnerability assessment signal, we're not the only one who are thinking about it. We're seeing a lot of analysts out there talking about this kind of vision, and this is exactly what we're presenting today. A new threat and vulnerability management capabilities built into Windows Defender, Microsoft Defender ATP. We changed the name today. Still need to get used to it. It's a best-of-breed vulnerability management tool, but also best of suits. It integrates really nicely with all the other pillars in the platform. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of cool demos of how it actually works. But before we begin, here's a question for you. Let's say that you're the security admin of your organization. You have a lot of tools that tells you a lot of things that you need to do in order to reduce the risk in the organization. And you have 99 vulnerabilities that you discover in your environment. Which one are you going to tackle first? Would it be A, the ones that affects the most hosts in the organization? Imagine a vulnerability on an application widely deployed in your organization. All your environment all your employees are vulnerable. Would it be B, the one that got the highest media attention? Perhaps it's not widely deployed in your organization, but you know, there's a big threat going on out there. There's a Twitter, people talking about that in the news. You go into CNN.com, there's a front page talking about that next threat. You want to take a look at that, of course. Or C, the one that is the most critical severity, the one that is probably got the highest CVSS rating score, which is critical. So who goes with A? What about B? See some hands in B and C? Okay, most of the hands going with C. I hope that by the end of this presentation, I will convince you that there's a new option number D, that looks at other factors within the organization that helps you better prioritize and understand which one you want to start first. But in order to get to that option, we need to first go a little bit and talk a little bit about the world of vulnerability management. This is the process of vulnerabilities are being discovered in IT, and the risk of these vulnerabilities are being evaluated. And when we look at the history of vulnerability management, it goes along back to the 90s, where security researchers wrote tools that look into the network, trying to figure out whether my services in the network are exposed. One of the first tools was called Satan. After that, this whole world of vulnerability assessment back in the days started to become a little bit more commercialized. We saw tools like Nmap and Nessus. These tools became much more advanced. They understood we cannot just scan from the outside because we just see the services. We need to go inside. So we introduced the concept, the vulnerability assessment world introduced the concept of authenticated scanning. It wasn't enough then to go and connect into the machine. Now you need to really understand the applications, try to understand its configuration. So this solution became much more application aware. Obviously, the more and more application that resides on our desktop means that there's more vulnerabilities, so they crowdsource it. People could actually write their own plugins and add their own logic to the vulnerability assessment solutions. And then, fast forwarding into the last couple of years, there's an explosion of technologies out there. Containers and clouds and IoT and a lot of and mobility and a lot of things that, of course, vulnerability can crawl everywhere. Up until today, that we can actually see that some of the vendors are becoming more agent-based, which is our focus today. Now, when we went to some customers and talked about their pain points, trying to understand, hey, you have the latest vulnerability assessment and vulnerability management technology in your hand. What are your pain points? And we found out a couple. The first one is around the discovering of threats. As you know, most of the solutions today are scan-based, which means that you run a scheduled scan to figure out what kind of risk I have in my organization. And that scheduled scan is usually a weekly scan, a monthly scan. And it's kind of a customer, when I talk to customers, they're saying it's kind of a luck game because they hope that by the time the scanner will scan their subnet, they hope the machine will be up. And if it missed that, then you're missing a lot of context about machines that are vulnerable, and you need to wait for the next scheduled scan. So you have a lot of gaps. You have a lot of blind spots in your organization. If tomorrow WannaCry 2 is going to erupt and become a big thing in the news, the first thing you want to know is how many machines in my org are vulnerable to WannaCry 2. If you run that scanner, you'll get that result for the entire organization probably in weeks. You don't get that full visibility of what's going on right now. The real-timeness of vulnerability assessment is missing. Another critical component of the scanner, which is lacking, is the fact that it's static by nature. Think about it. You run a scanner, it logs into the machine, collects all the information it needs in order to do the vulnerability assessment, and disconnects. And it's missing a lot of critical information. What was executed on the machine? Was the vulnerability that I discover reside in an application that actually execute? This is a critical information. Who execute them? In which permission? In which elevation privileges? This kind of context is something that is very crucial to later on try to understand which one you want to tackle first. And unfortunately, scanners that connect and disconnect are missing this critical context. Another area that we found that is very causing a lot of pain to our customers is around prioritization. Imagine that you have the best discovery solution in the world. What you'll end up with is a list of long reports of here's what you need to do in the organization. And when we went to customer, we saw these huge 1,000 pages reports telling them, hey, here's all the things that we find in your organization. And when I ask them, hey, which one do you want to tackle first? Most of them answer what you did. We're sorting them by severity. Unfortunately, severity does not equal risk. And this is something important that we need to remember. Severity is only one factor to take into consideration when you're trying to figure out what is the next thing you want to do. Another thing you may want to know is, what is the threat landscape of that vulnerability? Is it being exploited? Is there a threat actor who is targeting my organization who is leveraging it? What is the maturity of the exploit? Was it commoditized? These are critical bits of context that later helps you figure it out. Are you under attack? What is the risk to your organization? Another huge factor is your business context. And you're the only one who is aware what is important to your organization. The scanner who connects and disconnects from the machine is not aware of it. He's not aware whether the machine is high-value assets. He's not aware whether the processes that executed on our machine are a line of business application, which is critical to your organization. It misses all this critical context. And finally, even if I'll give you a magic box that discovers everything and prioritizes everything, you still need to go and fix it. And this is probably the biggest kind of bottleneck that we see in the industry, because vulnerabilities are discovered on a daily basis. You can actually see tons of them. But the IT doesn't grow that big, which means that they can't just handle everything and fix everything. And usually what happens is the security team discover a vulnerability, they wait for a patch, and then they start to negotiate with the IT. Can you fix it? What's in it for you to fix it? It's kind of a fight, and we see this separation of duties causing that long delays from a fix, this being out there, until it is implemented. The average in the industry today is around 90 days, and what usually happens, even after you convince the IT, this is a manual process. The IT will need to go and create a package and test it with rings and deploy it to a certain set of machines, call back the security admin, ask him, can you scan again? They will scan again. Some of them they will be missed because of the schedule scan. And eventually, just validating that the fix was applied takes a lot of time. So when you're thinking about these three pain points of discovering, prioritizing, mitigation, customers are suffering today. And obviously, with Microsoft, we want to help them. And for that, we're introducing a new approach to vulnerability management. This is a risk-based approach where we detect, prioritize, and mitigate vulnerabilities in your organization automatically and continuously. Forget about the term scanners. We have a built-in capability baked into Windows that continuously understand what you have installed, what was updated, what was uninstalled, by whom, how it was executed, in which privileges. All that information in near real time is being collected into our ATP cloud, where it's being enriched with external threat contacts coming from external feeds, as well as our own internal research team, and business context that is coming from your organization. You'll be able to mark, this is an important machine. This machine carries information, confidential machine. This machine was connected by a high-value user. All that information is being fused in the cloud, and eventually the system spits out a set of prioritized, tailored security recommendations to your organization that help you understand what is the best way to reduce the risk. Now, if we dive into each one of those components, discover, prioritize, and mitigate, let's see the internals of how they work. So let's start with the risk discovery, with the continuous discovery. We understand that vulnerabilities can appear in many different locations across the OS stack, and we're looking into protecting each and every one of them. Starting from the bottom, from the firmware vulnerabilities such as Spectre and Meltdown, and going up the stack, operation system components, third-party applications deployed on your machines. We're supporting thousands of them, and we're keeping adding more and more support. Another unique key value of our solution is, as I mentioned earlier, since we're baked into the operation system, and since we're part of the platform, which also contains an EDR component, we can actually monitor the execution of the vulnerable application. So we can actually see that, hey, there's an application which is not vulnerable, but at runtime, it loads a model which is vulnerable. And that model perhaps loaded another model which is vulnerable. We can actually look at the entire stack execution process tree and see which one of them is vulnerable. Think about a line of business app, something that is only unique to your organization. One of the developers in your company wrote. No one is aware of that. It doesn't have any CVEs. It doesn't have a CPEs. No one in the world knows about that. But probably that developer leveraged an open source library that he went into GitHub to get, and that library might have vulnerabilities. We'll be able to say, hey, there's an unknown executable that is executing, but at runtime, it loads a model which is vulnerable. This is very unique. It's very cool. And finally, of course, application extension. Some of them, applications such as Google extensions, or think about Notepad++ plugins. There's a lot of vulnerabilities in those plugin ecosystems. All the buffer overflow, denial of service that you usually hear about in the news, they're coming and they appear in this kind of location as well. And obviously, we want to be there as well. Now, it's important to understand that when attackers compromise organization or try to breach organization, they don't only leverage vulnerabilities. Actually, vulnerabilities is just kind of the first entry, the way to get inside the organization. The next step that attackers will likely take advantage of is misconfiguration. They're trying to take advantage of machines that are misconfigured in order to elevate their privileges, in order to do lateral movement inside the organization. So what we're doing is we're taking the concept of secure score, the device secure score that already existed in Windows Defender ATP, and expanding it into other pillars, mainly OS, things like file share analysis, looking at certificates that are installed, whether they're compromised. Accounts configuration, trying to understand whether the machine has users that are misconfigured and allow an attacker to take advantage of. Application misconfiguration, you can imagine you install your own third-party application that installed the driver, which has a vulnerability and would allow an attacker to take over that machine with system privileges and then lateral move. Attackers do that. And of course, network stack misconfiguration, trying to understand whether perhaps the machine is misconfigured in a way that will allow the attacker to hop between different machines. So we're looking at all the techniques that attackers are taking advantage of, misconfigurations that attackers are taking advantage of in order to lateral move, and we're adding them into the product. And each one of them is becoming a check that you can actually see, and we'll see a demo in a second. So let me quickly go into a demo mode. So this is our tenant today. What you can actually see over here on the left side is the new area, threat and vulnerability management, that we added into the product. There's a couple of pages here. I will walk you through kind of an end-to-end demo of this imaginary Contoso company. But before we'll dive into this dashboard, I want to start with the basics of vulnerability management, which is software inventory. Obviously, you first need to know what you have in order to know whether you're vulnerable. And as I mentioned earlier, since Windows Defender ATP is part of the operation system, since it's part of the OS, we continuously collect these signals all the time. So imagine that you just install the latest vulnerable WinRAR application or vulnerable 7-zip application or your own on your own line of business application. We'll get that signal, will flow into ATP, and minutes later, you'll be able to see that information over here in the software inventory list. So we can actually see products, the vendors, the weaknesses. These are the weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and misconfigurations that are associated with that product. We can actually dive into each one of them. So let's go into Office. We can see, for example, each software has a software page you can log into. We can see on the left some general information about Office. We can see the discovered vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are coming in real time, which means that the next Patch Tuesday, the April Patch Tuesday, you log in on the next day, all the CVs, all the machines that are vulnerable will appear here immediately. We can actually see the installed machines that have those vulnerabilities. We can see the version distribution. We can actually see there in this tenant, there's 3 different versions. Two of them are actually non-vulnerable, but that version 1.02 is vulnerable. So let's take a look at that machine. And this is the beautiful thing that we're adding. Vulnerability management is usually on the org-wide. You usually see recommendation on the org-wide. We're adding that context on the machine level itself. So during an investigation, you can actually go and see, oh, I see this alert, and during that time of the alert, here are the vulnerability that were discovered. So let's jump into the machine page. We can see you can see the old and familiar alert page, but with new added sections. Starting with, first of all, the software inventory. This is, again, in real time. Every time this machine will install something, we'll get that information. And we can actually go here and to the security recommendation and see here all the security recommendation right now to that machine. We can actually see that there's 41 of them, and this machine is currently at the medium level. I will walk you through soon how this medium level is actually being generated. But what you can actually see here is that the recommendations are not only on the org-wide, you can not only see that on the organization view, but you can also see it in the machine view. And if you want, you can go here to the security recommendation page, and you'll be able to see all the recommendations that we have right now in the organization. So this is the basics of vulnerability assessment, of vulnerability management, doing, first of all, vulnerability assessment, trying to understand what you have installed and whether it's vulnerable. And of course, secure configuration assessment, trying to understand whether an attacker has some misconfiguration he can take advantage of in order to propagate in the network. So here's an example for, here's one example of a vulnerability assessment. We can see that iTunes is vulnerable. We can see that 152 weaknesses was discovered on one device. And here's an example of secure configuration assessment. In this case, we notice that local LSA protection is disabled in 19 machines. You'll be able to get, of course, the description, the potential risk, what will happen, what is the risk of not fixing it, and of course, some insights around how many machines in the organizations are already configured correctly, or whether there's a well-known benchmark that is recommended to doing, for example, STIG, CIS, or Microsoft. So we have some great detection and discovery capabilities. We know how to detect vulnerabilities and misconfiguration across the entire stack, just like in the list I just showed you earlier. But as I mentioned earlier, not all vulnerabilities are born equal. And we need to understand that some vulnerabilities may be more critical and more riskier than others. And the way to understand that, which vulnerability is more important than the other, is to calculate the true risk of a machine given a set of vulnerabilities that was discovered in it. So what we're introducing is, as part of the Windows Defender ATP, the new threat and vulnerability management solution, is a new set of capabilities that allows you to figure it out what is the true risk of vulnerabilities. We're looking at the vulnerability discovered on the machine. We're trying to understand what is the external threat landscape out there, whether there's an exploit. I will show you a list in a second. Whether there's a threat exploit, whether there's a threat actor that is leveraging those vulnerabilities, but that's not enough. There could be thousands of actors out there that is targeting that vulnerability. The real question now after that is to ask, what is the impact, given this vulnerability will be exploited, what is the impact to the organization? So we're also looking at the asset, trying to understand what is the value of the asset to the organization. Now, another factor which is interesting to see over here when we're talking about risk is the number of vulnerabilities that are being discovered on a yearly basis. We keep seeing more and more vulnerabilities, more CVEs are being filed. We can actually see that trend going up. But when you look at the flat list below, the number of vulnerabilities that are actually being exploited, that someone actually wrote a stable exploit that will be able to take advantage of them, the number is pretty flat in the last decade. We don't see more and more exploit out there. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Attackers are leveraging the same vulnerabilities, the same exploit most of the time. We don't see them leveraging new exploit every time. And a huge factor, another big factor when we're talking about risk is time. As you know, the threat landscape change over time, and by that, the risk grow. Take, for example, WannaCry. Back in March 14, it was yet another security bulletin. No one ever heard about the term WannaCry. And it wasn't more important than the one that came in February. But what happened a month later when the attack tools from the NSA was leaked and suddenly Eternal Blue was exposed? Suddenly, the risk grew in the organization. There's an exploit somewhere. A month later, a threat actor picked that up, and it became a threat campaign known as WannaCry. Of course, the risk is now even greater and now bigger to organizations around the world. And a few days later, when Metasploit commoditized it in their own attack tools, this is where every kid scripty could download and exploit it. And obviously, the risk grew even bigger. And you want to make sure that the vulnerability management solution that you have track these kind of data points over time and reflect them inside that product. And in order to do that, we're introducing a new concept of risk calculation. I like to call it TLV, threat likelihood and value. This is a risk calculation that happens every hour on every machine in your organization that try to understand first, what are the threats, the weaknesses that are discovered in your organization. We're pulling all your inventory, trying to understand what kind of vulnerabilities and misconfiguration you have. We're infusing and enriching them with zero-day information, with exploit information. We want to understand whether the exploit is stable, whether it was being used, whether it was commoditized. We don't stop there. As I mentioned earlier, we're not just dropping a new TVM capabilities. We're communicating with the entire platform. And since there's an EDR component in that platform, we can also see whether there's live exploitation within your organization that take advantage of some of those CVEs. And this is big. If you'll be able to link between a vulnerability and an alert through a threat campaign, this is huge. And this is something that obviously you as security professionals would like to know about. And we're taking advantage of those. But as I mentioned earlier, the external threat landscape is not enough. You also need to figure it out. What is the likelihood, given those machines, that the machine will get breached, right? So you're looking at the machine, you're doing your risk management, and you're seeing these are all the vulnerabilities. What is the likelihood that the machine will get breached? And in order to do that, we're looking at how hardened is the machine. We're looking at the security posture of the machine, trying to understand, given this set of vulnerabilities, do you have any mitigation in place right now that will block them? If not, perhaps the likelihood of them getting exploited is much higher. We're doing this kind of calculation all the time. If the machine is internet-facing, its likelihood of getting breached even higher. If there's alert attempts within the organization, if we actually see this CVE is being exploited somewhere in the organization, the likelihood of this machine getting attacked, being next, is even higher. And we're taking that into account. And of course, we also need to understand what is the value, the impact of this threat into those machines. So we're trying to compute what is the value of the machine to the organization. And we're doing a lot of high-value analysis, high-value asset analysis. Starting with a cool integration, we're doing it with information protection. If you're familiar with this integration that was added into the ATP a few weeks ago, we're able now to tag machines that have confidential data in them. Whether if you drop a file with confidential data on it, we'll be able to tag that machine. We're taking advantage of that information during the prioritization factor. So we can actually see, oh, here's an attack, here's 20 machines that got attacked by the same vulnerability. Let's prioritize them. Let's start with the ones that have the most confidential data. Now let's continue with the ones that actually executed that application. You want to start with this one, and not the ones that are probably on vacation. So this is the power of signals coming in real time, allowing you to make smart decisions. Let's see this in action. So if we go back to the product, there are few things that I didn't went over. First of all, notice that every security recommendation starts with an action. Update to, enable something, disable something, fix something. This is not by coincidence. The security recommendations are dynamic, which means that they change but when the threat landscape changes. So you can imagine a certain application which is not widely deployed in your organization and is vulnerable, and there's no patch at the moment, we might recommend you to block it. If an hour later that vendor will release a patch, that recommendation is going to change into an update recommendation. If that application is a potentially unwanted application, perhaps we'll recommend you to uninstall it. And if it's a critical application, perhaps we're going to help you until the patches arrive to come up with an alternate mitigation. It's a button on top of the recommendation that tells you, hey, there's currently no patch at the moment, but our research team has found out that if you do this, it will mitigate that risk. By that, giving you the breathing time until a patch arrives, or if you can't deploy the patch, an alternative on what to do. Another cool thing that I didn't walk you through here is this column called the threats. What you can actually see here is two small icons. The first one indicates whether there's a public exploit that is available. The moment a public exploit is available to a vulnerability that is targeting that application, automatically that bug will appear. And of course, that machine that is vulnerable and has that CVE will automatically get more points, and by that, the impact of that machine to the organization grow, the exposure, the likelihood this machine will get attacked is become a lot higher. So we're taking that, again, into consideration. The icon next to it, which is gladly not turned on or not enabled, indicates whether there's an active alerts coming from the EDR module that take advantage of this CVE. So you can imagine a point where there's a critical vulnerability out there. A day later, a threat actor publishes an exploit, that small red bug turns on, and a day later, someone actually exploits it inside your organization. That left icon is turned on, and the recommendation, of course, will bubble up as more and more threat context, as we receive more threat context. And eventually, what this helps us, all this information helps us compute this number, which is the impact. What is the exposure impact to your organization? So right now, in this case, we can see that some machines, 4 out of 19 machines, didn't update to the latest March security bulletin that Microsoft released a couple days ago. And since there are some vulnerabilities there that are actually vulnerable and have other exploit, the impact to the organization is 13 points. You can actually now go to the main dashboard and make sense out of it. We can see that this organization exposure score is currently 50. Your job as security admin is to reduce that number and increase the configuration score, your security posture, harden your environment against this kind of threat. The way to do it is to consult with the prioritized list of security recommendations. We can see that the first one right now is update to Microsoft Windows. We can see that there is an exploit out there, but it wasn't exploited in the organization. So you have some time to do that before you'll be the next victim. And if you'll do that, if you'll fix on these 4 machines and you'll update the security patches on these 4 machines, you will be rewarded with 13 points, which means that the exposure score will be reduced. You'll go back into the low exposure score, which is where you want to be most of the time. So this is just a nice and some demonstration of the capabilities that we announced today, our ability to look and try to discover all the vulnerabilities you have, and then augment it with the threat landscape and business context, trying to understand what is the best way to prioritize it. So you can imagine 2 identical organizations with the same software will have different security recommendation because perhaps their business, the value of machines, their organization is different. Perhaps the applications didn't execute as in the other organization. These are all critical bits of information that help you make the right decision right now, prioritized. And finally, the next step, okay, so let's say that you fixed all the vulnerabilities, that you prioritize all the vulnerabilities and you decide that you want to fix it. Now comes the hard part. You need to start to negotiate with the IT admin and try to tell them what's in it for them to fix that vulnerability. And it usually goes something like this. I like to call it the 5 stages of mitigation grief, where you're coming to the IT and they're kind of in denial. You probably got this wrong, these are false positive. And then you prove it to them and they're angry because they say, it's a waste of time, we're reducing it all the time, we have compensating control, but vulnerabilities come again and again. And then after a fight, and we've seen it in some environment, the IT, I wouldn't say give up, but will say, you know what, I will do this one. And they'll just accept it, but it doesn't have to be like that. And we acknowledge that with the new threat and vulnerability management component, we acknowledge that there are 3 ways to treat risk inside the organization. First of all, remediating the risk. Obviously, if you can update an application or uninstall it, you remediate the problem. Problem solved. But sometimes you can't remediate, or perhaps there is no update at the moment, or pushing that update is not allowed, or is a bit challenging for the organization. Some organization would like to find out a way to mitigate it. For example, set a certain configuration, disable a component, push 2-factor authentication, harden the environment, do something that will mitigate that risk while the vulnerability is still there. And when and if the organization cannot remediate or mitigate, they will just accept the risk. Sometimes, if it's not cost effective to push a remediation or mitigation, the organization will say, I'll take it on me. I understand that I'm vulnerable. This is okay. And obviously, we want to help the organization do that. And I'm really excited to introduce a new set of game-changing capabilities that we're pushing into the product in the form of a 1-click remediation action into Intune. This is a tight integration we've been working on with the Microsoft Intune and SCCM teams that allows you with a single click of a button to take all the context that you as security professional knows and transfer it in a structurable manner as a ticket to the IT, including all the machines that are vulnerable, including the threats, the description, as well as how to fix that vulnerability. Kind of what's in it for the IT to fix that. And we're having a lot of other, in the roadmap, we have a lot of other things that I will talk to you about that later. But this is a new set of capability that I will show you in a second. Now, think about it. Since we're on the box, we're on the device continuously collecting signals all the time, we have the luxury of validating whether the recommendation that we recommended the customer was actually executed on the machine. So imagine that I have WinRAR version 1, and my recommendation for the organization is go to version 2. What I can do is I can start tracking that machine and see whether it went to version number 2. And I can track it with a timer. This allows me, 1, to validate that the fix was there, and 2, to track the mean time to mitigate from the moment I discovered the vulnerability, from the moment I send it to the IT, please fix it, until the moment they actually completed that task and all the machines were fixed. Let's see that in action. So if we go back to the security monitoring page, we can go back to the dashboard. We can see the organization current exposure score is 50, it's in medium, and you want to fix things. Let's say the organization, let's say that the security admin in Contoso read about a critical vulnerability in iCloud. He sees that you have one machine that is exposed and you want to fix it. All you need to do right now, you can review the vulnerabilities, you can view the exposed machines. You can now go here and click on this button that's called Request Remediation. What is the button is doing? It's actually raising a ticket to Intune, telling the IT admin, hey, there's a critical vulnerability out there, I want you to fix it. All you need to do is click here, open a ticket in Intune, set a due date, say, I want to get fixed in 2 weeks. Write down your justification. Hey, Jane, please fix this. You can export the remediation activity, of course, and click on Submit Request. That's all you need to do. At that moment, what will happen is a ticket will be created on the Intune side. Let's jump to the Intune side. This is the view of the IT admin. It's a new area that the Intune team have been working on in the last couple of months. You can actually see the security task. Suddenly, the IT admin will receive a notification. Hey, the security admin wants you to fix something. He will go back to this page, click in here, and he will see, oh, I have a new pending request calling update iCloud. He will click on it. Inside the request itself, you will see all the context of the machine, all the devices coming from ATP, the devices you need to fix, their DNS, their name, everything that were already onboarded into Intune, as well as information on how to fix it, including the note that you wanted to give to the IT. All the IT admin needs to do right now is first of all go model that application, the application is already modeled, just push a package that will fix that vulnerability, and click on I accept it. You can write back a note back to the security admin, fixed, don't worry. Click on yes, and done. You as security admins don't need to nudge them. You don't need to call them, you don't need to email them. All you need to do is now go to this section called remediation and see in real time how this update to iCloud is actually being propagated, the package that the IT admin pushed, how it's being propagated to the machines that you asked him to fix. So if you have 100 machines that you want to get fixed, you click a button, the IT admin gets all these machines, he clicks on a button, pushes a package, and now you as the security admin can see in real time how this progress bar go up and up until it reaches a completion point, which means that all the machines in the organization are fixed. Obviously, if time will pass, in this case tomorrow, you'll be able to see a note saying due date has arrived, which means that we gave a grace period for the IT team. They didn't do that, so you can actually communicate with them and start negotiating, hey, I've noticed that you accepted the task, but I don't see the machines are getting fixed. This gives you the visibility of not only what's going on with the vulnerability in the organization, but also what's going on with the remediation inside the organization. So if we put everything back in perspective and kind of walk you through what is the day-to-day in the new threat and vulnerability management solution. You're a security admin, you're a security professional. You log into the new Microsoft Defender Threat ATP. There's a new threat and vulnerability management section. You visit the dashboard on a daily basis or a weekly basis, depending on your cadence, whenever you heard about the threat going on in the news. You're coming here and you're looking at your exposure score and your configuration score. Your job is to reduce the exposure score. Obviously, we're all security professionals. We cannot reach zero. Even if we did, we go to sleep, there's a new threat that will pop during that night, and that number will grow again. However, we want to help you try to understand which one you want to tackle first. And the way to do it is to consult with the security recommendation on the right. This is a prioritized set of lists that changes based on the threat landscape. You'll come here tomorrow, and perhaps there's going to be a critical zero day to a different third-party Contoso media player application that will go and propagate. And as we collect more information about this, the vulnerability, the threats, the exploitation within your organization, this allows us to bubble up that recommendation and focusing you on the thing that matters the most and will reduce the most risk to your organization. So your job, again, is to look at the exposure score and the configuration score. You want to reduce the exposure score. You want to increase your config score. In order to do that, you consult with the set of security recommendation. These security recommendations are prioritized by the ones that will reduce the most risk and will increase the most score. All you need to do is click on one of these security recommendations. You can see the list of them. Request a remediation for that. Set a due date, set the time, send the request. and work with your IT peer in order to remediate these kind of vulnerabilities. Obviously, there's times, as I mentioned earlier, there's time where you cannot fix those vulnerabilities. That's why we're introducing a set of rich exception handling that allows you to get a justification, try to come up with a justification why I cannot fix this vulnerability. Perhaps there's a third-party compensation control. Perhaps there's a planned remediation coming in 2 weeks. There's a lot of teams, for example, when I talk to, they say, hey, we are aware that there's a Microsoft security bulletin that is coming, the patch Tuesday that is coming next week. However, our team is going to fix it in 2 weeks. We want that grace period. So you'll be able to go and say, hey, I want that grace period for 20 days, done. That security recommendation will not bubble up until that due date. Obviously, we're giving you this kind of exception management that you can always go here to the remediation page and manage all these exceptions. You can decide to cancel it. You can see which one is active. And this allows you to manage what you want to fix in your organization and what you don't want to fix. But the idea is to tell you what is the most critical, that is causing the most risk to the organization right now. So if we'll wrap up, before we wrap up, here's if we'll revise and go back to the revised question that I asked you earlier. Most of you chose C, but I hope that right now you'll figure out that the best way and the best course of action is to tackle the ones that are causing the most risk to the organization. And for that, you need a tool that will guide you and tell you what is causing risk in your organization by looking at the threat landscape and you're looking at the business context of your organization. And only you know best what is your organization value of machines. And we're giving you those tools to help you decide what is valuable and what is not. So a couple of session takeaways before we finish. We're taking a new risk-based approach to vulnerability management to help differentiate the hot from the not. That list of security recommendations is prioritized what is important to your organization and is tailored to your organization. It's coming in real time. Every time there's a new critical vulnerability, it will be there. If there's a 0 day, it will be tagged. If there's a way for us to help you mitigate it, we'll let you know about that. When there's something where there's new information that arises on that vulnerability, again, that information will flow there in real time. Another thing is this new technology is a disrupting new technology in the field of threat and vulnerability management that helps you focus on 3 things. Discover where your risk is, help you prioritize this, and give you the tools to automate the process of remediation. Bridging between security admin and IT admin is critical today. These are 2 different teams, siloed. We want to help them together. So bringing SecOps with Sec admins by bridging EDR signals and TVM signals, and bridging Sec admins with IT admins by transferring all the context of the recommendation in a nice structure, what's in it for me to fix this vulnerability inside the security administration tools. And finally, Microsoft Threat and Vulnerability Management, this new set of capability is part of our E5 license, which means that if you're an existing ATP customers, you'll be able to see this in your portal in the next couple of weeks, starting in April. If you're not, I'll be more than happy to walk you through a trial version and that's about it. So first of all, thank you very much for attending. Any questions? Yes? Great question. So the question was, how do we set the business value? So we're going to give you tools such as, I showed you the software inventory. You'll be able to click on a software and say, this is a high-value application, for example. Every time we'll detect this application is executed on a machine, we'll tag that machine as a high-value asset. During the creation of machine groups, you'll be able to tag what kind of the value of the machine, low, medium, and high. We'll take that into consideration. We'll also automatically try to understand if we see a process that is only unique to your organization. No one, I see it in the world, it's only unique. I will ask you a question. Hey, I see this application, this hash uniquely runs on your assets. Is that important? You tell me yes, I'll take that into consideration as well. Yes?
We're talking about automation remediation. Is that also possible to make, let's say, one man, let's say a security officer, put in charge and let them handle everything within the organization? He gets the scores overview just after receiving, let's say, it's called Microsoft Patch Tuesday, and Wednesday he's checking out and he's like, okay, I want to hit that button, get everything patched. Don't want to negotiate with IT. Is that possible?
So first I'll answer everything is possible. I think that in today's reality, at least what we're seeing in big enterprises, there is this separation of duties around. So the question, sorry, was around whether we'll have a one-click button that just fix it, forget about everything. I don't think it will fly in big organizations that have a set of processes and that you need to communicate. Things will break down. Suddenly, application teams will call you what's going on. We understand that, obviously. That's why we're going toward automation. We're giving you the right tool to communicate with the team, and at some point, we'll add some rules that will allow you to automate some of this creation. Just like when we went to the world of EDR alerts. There was a lot of EDR alerts. Now there's automation that automatically close this. The future of remediation is coming. I don't think we're still there where a single team can just click, fix everything, but we need to provide them with the tools to get there, and this is the first step to be there.
But still will be politicians inside the company to get things done regarding security.
That will reduce the friction of collecting all the information, sending it via email, justifying everything. Think about the IT admin gets all the... You're trying to convince the IT fix something. If you give him the concept, tell him there's a critical vulnerability. Everyone is vulnerable. If you do that, the exposure score will go in half. You give him this justification for his boss. Hey, look what I did for the company today. I helped the teams to reduce the risk in my organization. So giving him these tools empower him to do these kind of decisions. And obviously, as we get the trust from the customers, we'll have that button eventually of let's automate it. But are we there yet? Mentally, I don't think so. Yes?
How about non-Windows systems and on-premises installations?
Great question around cross-platform. So today, earlier today, Rob announced that we're going cross-platform, Windows becoming Microsoft Defender ATP. Our first platform that we're going to support is Mac, and TVM will follow as well. So we're starting with AV for Mac, and then the other pillars as well. But assume we'll continue and adapt more and more platform as requests and requirements from customers arrive. Yes?
All subscriptions are mostly user-based. Is there a device-based option for companies that have or more employees than devices?
Sorry, so what was the question? Sorry?
Some of my customers have more employees than devices. Is there some kind of device-based option that's available somewhere where you can run it on a device-based license, not a user-based license?
So right now it's part of the ATP ecosystem, which means that if they're running ATP, this is running on each one of their devices, and you'll be able to, just like I showed in the demo, to dive into specific machine and get the full list of what is installed, what is vulnerable, and what is the recommendation. And of course, if you want to go wide and see it's on the organizational wide view, you can go into the security recommendation.
The question is about licensing. It's a license.
Oh, so...
Per device or only per user? Per user.
Yeah, currently, as of now, it's per user.
Yeah, so all our licensing models for ATP right now are per user. We continue to talk and understand what our scenarios, like the one you referred to, where there may be a lot more employees than our devices, and then cost may be an issue. So we're looking into that. But right now, all our options are per user.
I'm losing deals on that, so please. I was surprised to hear about some kind of ticketing. Is there a kind of an ITSM functionality available there?
So this ITSM, it's not a full-blown service now as of now, but Intune introduced the concept of ticketing, so you can actually go and open this kind of ticket within Intune. So it's just, again, just the beginning. There's a blog that is announced today by Intune. You can learn more about their ticketing system.
Is that all that information available through APIs?
It will be. It will be. It will be in public preview. We'll have API capabilities. You'll be able to assume that most of the things that you saw on the dashboard, you'll be able to pull via an API to build your own dashboard and fuse it with data from your organization. We acknowledge that some organizations need that as well, of course.
Just because tied into that question, so if you use another ticketing system like ServiceNow, so it would be great to have that also button, as a registration button, also available in other channels.
Definitely. So this is.
Also connect with ServiceNow and through all this. We can do that all using logic apps, and logic apps are already integrated with the.
So ServiceNow integration is planned. You saw that button said Open Ticket in Intune. Expect to have another button, Open Ticket in ServiceNow as well. Cool. So thank you very much.